Hello and good morning. It is test day. And as I like to do, I thought I would make a quick video to just remind you of some of the important things we've learned in class, maybe help you out a little bit on things that may or may not be on the test today. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk to you about getting started with pandas. So as we learned in class, what is Pandas? Pandas is a Python library that focuses specifically on data analytics. And it's super popular and you will like it. Most people do because it feels a little bit like Excel. I joke around and I call it the Excel of Python. So let's talk a little bit about Pandas. Just overall, just a couple quick things. And then we'll jump into Google Colab and look at what we can do with the Pandas library. So the first thing you want to know is it's a framework, it's a library that organizes data into objects, and those objects are called data frames. So one more time, this is Pandas creates objects, and these objects are called data frames. Data frames will feel very familiar to you because they store data similar to the way Excel stores data. They store it in tabular fashion in columns and rows. But when it does it, it's just slightly different from Excel. So a couple things in Excel versus in Pandas. In Excel, you have columns and rows, and they use a referencing style called A1 style. So in A1 style referencing, the very first cell in an Excel workbook is cell A1. A is the column, 1 is the row. Well, in Pandas data frames, and in a lot of other things too, columns don't have letters, columns have numbers, just like rows have numbers. Additionally, since we do use base 10 math, right, it doesn't start at 1, reference indexes start at 0 inside Python. Just like with lists, right, the first list position is 0. So if you're looking at cell A1 in Excel, in Pandas, that would be cell 0, 0, or space or position 0, 0. So the index starts at 0, the columns have numbers just like the rows. So instead of me walking through this PowerPoint, which is absolutely available on Canvas for you guys if you happen to be in class with me, let's just jump right into Google Colab and start a new workbook. We'll load our Titanic data set and we'll work from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Google Colab. Actually, I'm going to take the easy way. So I'm going to go to Google Drive. Here's my Google Drive. Here's my 365 folder and all the data we've been working with in class. Now what we want is this Titanic data set. But what I'm going to do is I'll just right click. I'm going to use another method. So go to More, go to Google Colab, and it's going to automatically open Google Colab for me in a blank workbook. Or excuse me, in a blank notebook. So now, because we're working in Pandas and we're working with existing data, what we're going to want to do is mount our Google Drive. So I'm going to jump over here to the left, like so, and it's going to take a second, and eventually I will be able to mount this Google Drive. So we'll pop over here. It's got to think for a minute. Slowly but surely. There we go. So before, it's still not mounted. It looks like it is, but what I'm going to need to do is go up here and click this little icon here. We're going to go to connect the drive. And that's going to take a second depending on how much data is on your Google Drive. So I'll just take a sip of coffee while it's doing its thing. Faster than I thought. Okay, so I'm going to go to Drive. I'm going to go to My Drive. Here's my 365 folder. And there's my Titanic data set. Now we can't do anything with it yet. What we need to do is we need to read this data into a Pandas data frame. So in order to do that, the first thing I'm going to have to do is actually import the Pandas library. So let's talk about that for a second. And I know I've gotten feedback in some of my other videos saying, well, it's so simple to import libraries. Why do you have to talk about it? Well, this is a class for people that have never actually worked with Python before. So if you happen to fumble across this video just looking to learn a little bit, hey, welcome. But if you're in class with me, I don't want to assume you know how to do anything yet if I haven't talked to you about it. So the first thing you need to know is Pandas is not readily available when you open up a Jupyter Notebook with Python. The way I describe it is, think about your iPhone. When you buy your iPhone and it comes from the store, when you take it out, it's got a base level of skill sets. Like it can do a certain thing. It can do certain things, but that's it. If you wanted to add functionality to that iPhone, what you'd have to do is install other apps. Python libraries are sort of like that. Python has its base functionality. But if you wanted to do other things, there are all these libraries out there that are totally free, you don't have to pay for, that you can add to your Python runtime. Now, the trick with that is you have to run this every time you run your runtime. So like if I close Google Collab and then I come back in, I'd have to import pandas again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import pandas, that's the library, as PD. So let's talk about what that does first. So pandas is the library that I'm importing, and as PD is an alias. So what that means is instead of me having to type pandas every time I want to access the pandas library, I can simply type the alias PD. So think of it just like a nickname. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called dataframe. Okay. And within that, I'm going to use pandas. So I'm going to go PD dot read underscore CSV. Okay. So I'm telling it to read a CSV into this data frame object that I'm creating. Now notice that I've got the parentheses here, and inside that I've got the single quotation marks. What I need to do is take the path to the file that I want to read in and paste it inside here. So the easiest way to do that is I'm going to jump over to Google Drive again, right click, and I'm going to go to copy path. I'm going to jump right over here, and I'm going to paste that path in. All right. So now let's test it. So before I run this cell, I'm going to jump down and I'm going to say df. And when I do that, hey, there we go. Check it out. So we have a file. Okay. So this is a pandas data frame. So a couple of things to get you acclimated with pandas data frame. So these dark numbers that are in bold and these dark words that are in the bold at the top, those are the column and the row headings. So these numbers are your index numbers. And these dark words, those are your column headings. So just like we talked about, right? Notice that it starts at 0 and it goes to 890. And if we look at the shape of the data in the pandas, when you read a pandas data frame, when I display it like this, it'll actually show me the shape of the data. It's telling me there's 891 rows and 12 columns. 891 rows, 12 columns. So that's another thing that's different from Excel in pandas versus pandas. So in Excel, when we talk about references, we always talk about the column first. So we'll say A1 would be column A, row 1. But in pandas, notice that it's reversed. So it's rows, then columns. So 891 rows, 12 columns. Okay. So the next thing, when you display this data frame, which is what I did right here when I just typed df, notice I didn't have to print df. I can just simply do df like so. It shows you the first 5 rows and the last 5 rows of the data. The first 5 rows is called the head, and the last 5 rows is called the tail. So what you're seeing is the head of the data and the tail of the data. Just helps you understand what you have. Okay. So now when you're working with pandas, if you want to see the head or the tail at any time, you can do that by simply typing df.head. Just like so. And when I do that, it'll give me the first 5. If I do df.tail, it'll give me the last 5. Okay. So now questions that come up is, what if I want to see more than 5? That's okay. You can do that. All I need to do is df.head. And then however many file rows I want to see, that's how many I'm going to type in here. So if I wanted to see 10 instead of the first 5, I'll do df.head 10. Remember, it starts at 0. There's my first 10 rows. So data frames, pretty easy, right? So a couple other things we can do that are super handy when you're working with pandas is pandas got all these built-in functions that you can do, sort of like Excel. So if I wanted to just explore my data, right? So if I'm doing crisp DM and I want to just have business understanding or data understanding, there are a couple of things that I can do to just kind of get a ballpark of what's happening inside my data. And I can look at it right now, just looking at the first 10 rows and see there's some issues, right? So for example, with the age here, notice that the age says NaN, not a number. That's not good. We don't like those. But before we get into that, let's try some things. So I can do df and I can use describe. Oh, if I spell right. So when I do df describe, what it's going to do is it's going to give me descriptive. It would help if I spelled describe right, wouldn't it? I almost spelled it wrong again. There it is. So when I do df describe, it's going to automatically give me descriptive statistics about all of my data, anything that it can, and it does it all at once. So it makes things really easy for you. Describe is a great way to just understand some of your data right off the bat, just kind of get a ballpark of what's happening. Just understand what you have. Requires almost no effort. You simply do df dot whatever function you want, and in this case it's describe. Now while we're in here though, let's take a look at some of the basic descriptive statistics, and I want to show you how you can run these individually without having to use describe. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, just depends. But the upside is if you've learned one, you've kind of learned them all. So if you know how to do max and you know how to do min, then you can do standard deviation and you can do value counts. Like all of those things are pretty darn easy. But let's just start with some basics and we'll work it from there. So let's start with the basics. So say we wanted to know the most somebody paid to be on the Titanic. Like how was the most expensive ticket on the Titanic? So fare, right here, fare is the column that contains the fare price for the Titanic, aka the ticket price. So if I wanted to know the max fare price, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do df, then I'm going to do square brackets. And if you remember, square brackets are sort of like a list. We're not putting in a list here, but I need to put the name of the column that I'm referencing in here. So what I'm going to want is fare. So I'm going to do df.fare, then I'm going to do a dot, and after that, I simply tell it what I want. So I can do max, just like this. When I do that, it's going to tell me that the most someone paid to get on the Titanic was $512. I could do the same thing again. So I could do, yes, we know. My alarm just went off saying, hey, you should make that video. I'm already making the video, so it's all good. So we'll do df fare again, and I could do the opposite. I could say df fare.min, and it'll tell me that somebody got on the Titanic for free. I could also do df fare.mean, and it's going to tell me that the average ticket price to get on the Titanic was $32.20. Okay, so those are just some basics getting started with data frames. But what are some other things we could do? Well, if I go back and look at my head again, I see that I've got a column there called sex. So that column called sex tells you if it's a male or a female that got on the Titanic. So if I was interested in the total number of men versus the total number of women that got on the Titanic, I could figure that out by using value counts. Value counts is sort of like the frequency function in Excel. It'll count the number of occurrence of specific value. So for example, if I did df age dot value underscore counts, it's going to tell me, let's take those parentheses away. I said age, and I didn't actually want age. I actually wanted sex. There we go. And it's going to tell me there were 577 men and 314 women on the Titanic. So we're learning a few things. Super handy. A couple other things we might want to learn as we explore our data. Maybe we're interested in just the type of data types that are used inside this data frame. So if I do df.dtypes, it's going to tell me what the data frame types are. So each column, for example, they're either a 64-bit integer or object would be a string or a floating point. It's going to tell me all those things, right? So it tells me passenger ID is a whole number. It tells me that name is a string. It tells me that sex is a string. It tells me that the ticket price should be a string, right? Because it's alphanumeric. All things that are super handy, super duper handy. So a couple other things we can do that might be nice for us. So let's look at our data frame one more time. So one thing you'll see if we look at our data frame, well, I guess I'll have to look at the whole thing. So let's just do df. Is if I look at my columns here, see under age, I've got this NaN. NaN stands for not a number. So basically it means we didn't know. We didn't know what the age of Miss Catherine Helen Carey Johnston is. We don't know how old she is. So because we don't know how old she is, we have a couple different techniques we can use to try to do something with that null value. We don't like null values in general, just having nothing there. So we could fill in a 0, but a 0 isn't super accurate. Obviously, that person wasn't born on the Titanic. And additionally, if we were to do some metrics, it could really mess things up, right? So if we did average, a 0 really messes up averages. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to fill that null value with an average value of all the ages. By filling it with the average, it's not going to impact the average very much. So I want to show you how to do that. We're going to do that using this method called fill in a. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this df and I'm going to do fill in a like so. Okay. So then from there, I actually have to tell it the value that I want to fill. So I could just say something like 0, right? So if I fill the null values with 0, I could do that. Now, also, I need to actually take a step back because I'm not filling the entire data frame with the average. I'm going to do df dot age. Then I'm going to do fill in A. Now, if I didn't do df dot age, that could have caused problems because what we really want is just the age column to be filled in with something, not messing around with everything else. So I'm going to do df dot age, or excuse me, df age dot fill in A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the average age and fill that in. So here's how I do that. So we're going to go df age. Okay. Then I'm going to use that cool function that we just learned called mean. And that's what it's going to do. So it's going to say, hey, anytime there's a null value in the age column, just like right here with Catherine, we're going to fill that with the mean. Now, in order to make this stick, in order to make this stay, we actually have to do one other thing. So we're going to say in place equals true. Now, once I do that, if I display that data frame, if I look at Miss Catherine here, check it out. Miss Catherine, instead of her being null, right? So right up here, she had a null value. Now, Miss Catherine is 29. Super helpful. Okay. So while we're at it, what if we wanted to sort by male versus female? Or what if we wanted to sort by age? We could do that pretty quickly, right? So if we want to know the youngest versus the oldest people on the Titanic. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new data frame. So we'll call it df age. That's really confusing. So df age, I don't want to confuse you. I'm basically going to create a new data frame. Think of it kind of like a variable. And what I'm going to do from that is I'm actually going to take the existing data frame, which is just df, and I'm going to do dot sort values. And actually it's going to be df, dot sort values. And based on that, I'm going to sort it on, let's go with age. And then what we'll do is we'll just display that. And when I do that, take a look at my ages. Now, some of my ages are real weird. So like, look at these. Some of these are children, clearly, if they're not even a year old. And the oldest person on the Titanic, which survived, by the way. How impressive. Look at this. Henry Wilson Barkworth was 80 years old, was on the Titanic, and survived. How cool is that? So what I did was I simply sorted based on values. But when I did it, I had to declare it as a new variable. And that's why I didn't want to confuse you. So I said, hey, new df equals the existing df sorted data frame sorted on values. Okay, so those are pretty handy things. So one more thing I want to show you before I get out of here with pandas is a couple different methods to create pandas data frame. So there's two ways to do it. There's one that I like to do, and then there's one that I think is too confusing. So let me just quickly fast forward through there we go, through my data or my PowerPoint here. So there's two ways to create a blank data frame or a data frame from scratch. One way to create a data frame from scratch is by using the dictionary method. And we talked about dictionaries in a previous video. So go back and check that out if you don't know what a dictionary is. In summary, in brief, a dictionary is a key valued pair object that can store multiple values. And one way to create a data frame is by using the data frame constructor. So that's what this dot data frame is. And then entering in the values that you want to be inside your data frame as dictionaries. The other way to do it is by making a list of lists. And I'm really not a huge fan of doing this. It can get very confusing. So a list of lists, basically what you do is you'd still use that data frame constructor. And don't worry, we're going to do it in just a minute, so you'll see it. And you'd enter in the rows first, and the rows go in as a list inside a list. So 159 would be row 0, 2610 would be row 2 or row 1, 3711 would be row 3. Then you'd jump over here, and you'd actually have to enter in the columns as well. In my mind, it's just confusing. I'm not a huge fan. The dictionary method is so much easier to remember how to do. So before we get out of here, let's jump back into Google Colab and let's look at how we can very quickly create a list and, or excuse me, not a list. Let's quickly look at how we can create a pandas data frame from scratch using the dictionary method. So what we're going to do is jump back over into Google Colab. And let's just do something really quick and easy. Sorry, let's get that out of there. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another data frame object. So I'm going to go df2, that's the variable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pd dot, and the first thing I do is I want to use this data frame constructor. See that right there? So I want to use the data frame constructor, and what that's going to let me do is it's going to let me enter in the values that I want to be inside this data frame as a dictionary in key value pairs. So let's just say we're keeping track of the grades of our classes. So we'll say we're taking MS 100, and in MS 100 we received an A. Oh, sorry, not an A pass, because that is a pass-fail class. And notice that I entered in the value for MS 100 as a P. Well, that's, you'll see, well, actually, let's just look at what that does on its own first. So I'm going to jump in and we'll just do df2. And when I do that, see it? So MS 100, and it gave me a P for pass. Now what would happen is inside this frame here, inside this list of the dictionary, if I kept entering values, it would keep entering rows. So this is the key. The key is going to be the column, and then everything inside this list key value pair in the dictionary is going to then give me rows. So if I added another grade, it would just keep going down. Now in this particular case, we wouldn't want to do that because you can only have one grade in MS 100. But let's just say that if we did have another grade, like say you got a pass for first assignment, and then you got a fail for the second assignment. So if I do that now, I've got two grades, MS 100 pass for grade 1, MS 100 fail for grade 2. Now, if I wanted to add another column to my data frame, I could do that by simply adding in another dictionary entry. So I could say MS 265. Okay. From there, I'm simply going to add this list here, and then I put in my grades again. So let's say I got an A on my assignment 1, and I got an A on my assignment 2. Okay. So I entered in the key, MS 265, which would become the column, and then I enter in the list, right, of the grades that I got. And I print that again. And now I've got an A for MS 265 class 1 or assignment 1, and an A for 265 assignment 2. So with that, my friends, I think this is a good place to stop. Good luck if this is test day for you and you're listening to this video for the very first time. I'm sure you'll be great. Give you a little hint, it's more theory than you think. So multiple choice, short answer, fill in the blank, but there is definitely Python understanding as part of the theory. So with that, it's always a pleasure. Like those young kids say, if I helped you out, click like and subscribe. I just do this because I enjoy it. I really am just a big old nerd. So good luck, friends. I'll see you in a couple hours, and we will talk to you soon.